Let's try that again. Very good. Very good. The dance of the microphones at St. James. Dominic's going to fix that before he goes. That was pilot error this time. Good morning, all. This morning we mark a joyous celebration, as Dominic has pointed us to this. This is the day of the dedication, where we celebrate and mark the dedication of this cathedral church to God's mission and ministry in the world. And as he indicated, it is a complicated date to fix. Time can be tricky in God's kingdom. Time is tricky and elusive in God's world and in our sacraments, and sacramental signs like this church building are no exception. Those who were able to join us at the 10 o'clock, I know that we had a decent crowd in there who were able to join us for the Dean's Forum and hear a couple of our parishioners sharing from the deep history of this place. And I invite you, if you were there, to continue to find ways to learn more about our history. It's always fascinating when we dig into it, and we have wonderful docents and historians. Thank you, David. Thank you, Tom, for taking us through that this morning. If you were there, you would have heard about our early history. St. James began its life as a parish in 1834 with simple prayers among like-minded people. A woman who found herself missing her church back home on the East Coast and decided to try and gather a few like-minded folks to pray with her, and before we know it, she had founded St. James Church, named actually for her church back home. Nothing more meaningful than that. But she liked that back home, and here she continued that. The parish was dedicated then. They worshipped at first in somebody else's house of worship, I believe Presbyterian. And then they began to build, about 20 years later, build a house where love could dwell, where they could worship. And it took them quite some time to actually finish the building. That first building in this location started in the 1850s, and it was coming sort of painstakingly to its finishing in the final sort of part, the last quarter of that decade, or of that century rather, in 1870 and 1871. I'll have people correct me if I've got this wrong, but they were really kind of working and laboring to finish this building so that it could be not only a glorious worship space, but a place that would house ministries, the church school, and other ways to reach out to the community and to be the church they wanted to be. They finished it and had the service of dedication in September of 1871, where they were dedicating to God their newly completed church to God's glory. And then within a month, those of you who know your Chicago history will know what's coming next. Within a month, they watched this church they had built and finished over 20 years be consumed, except for the bell tower, consumed by the Great Chicago Fire in October of 1871. All of that work, all of that labor, all of that love, all of that sacrifice, a heaping, smoking pile of ashes, except for the bell tower and a few pieces of the exterior walls. And I have always marveled at that moment. The people of St. James rose to the challenge, and with clarity of purpose and with an indomitable hope, it was within almost 4 years exactly that they rebuilt this church, the one that we're sitting in today. And it was consecrated and dedicated in October of 1875, this holy space in which we sit, dedicated to the glory of God and to the service of God's people in the world. I've often marveled at that decision and at their will and at their faith and their confidence. What was it that drove church members, every one of them who had surely suffered their own devastating losses, to look at that smoking pile of rubble and say, "We will rebuild this church"? In the intervening 147 years, this remarkable space has been soaked through with the prayers of the faithful, the pleas of the struggling, the longings of the seeking, and the joy of community. This building has been an anchor, a shelter, an evangelist, a space made sacred by the people who gather in it. And this is why at this Feast of Dedication, we are not celebrating 147 years, but rather 188. We count from the time not of the foundation of this building, but of the founding of our worshiping community. We count from the time when God laid the foundation of this community and began to build with the living stones throughout the generations, with Christ as the chief cornerstone. And so on this day, we give thanks not only for this special place in which we draw near to God in prayer, but also for the community over time through whom we are called, each one of us, into a deeper relationship with God and with one another. It is worth noting that while the people of St. James were rebuilding this magnificent structure, those people, while doing that, they were at the same time dedicating themselves, their resources, their time, their money, to the aid and relief of the many people around them who had suffered tremendous loss in the wake of the fire. They had been on the verge of launching an orphanage for half orphans. And that was just before the fire, and then after they came back into community, they continued with that charitable work. This is a community that has always seen the importance of the beauty of holiness in our worship space, but also of the beauty of the human spirit that is all around us, and in ministering to those people in God's name who are in need of help. You know, we find ourselves poised at this moment, this morning, in a sort of transition. I'm not sure that surviving a global pandemic and the impending departure of our dean on to greater glory in a few weeks, I'm not sure that amounts the same sort of disruption of the Great Fire. But we do find ourselves this Sunday looking not only backwards with gratitude, but looking forward. And while we might reasonably have just the slightest bit of trepidation about what is to come next in this place, I believe that like those earliest members of St. James, we are looking forward with hope, with confidence, with determination, and with love. And like our forebears, we are facing into our future with a challenge or two, but all the same, we are determined to act as they did, to act like a church, to solve our big problems, but also keep doing what it is that God calls us to do as Christians, as people who walk in the way of Jesus. God is calling us to be those living stones this day. And so it is more fitting that on this day when we celebrate the legacy of our building and all it's enabled, that we should be hosting our neighbors downstairs in our St. James meal, where we, month after month, gather God's beloved and give them a meal, and more than a meal, give them community and relationship. They, along with us, our guests today, are living stones, just as you and I are. Living stones building a world that looks more like the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom that Jesus describes. Just a couple days ago, this past Friday, I, along with a delegation of St. James leaders, attended the delightful Episcopal Charities Gala. It was a wonderful evening of fellowship, but where we also focused on what it looks like for the whole diocesan community to build a temple of living stones, building a more just and equitable reality in our context here in Greater Chicago. And I'm sure it will not surprise you to hear that our outreach ministries here at St. James and our St. James leaders, including our children in our church school, were featured rather prominently in this diocesan charities video presentation. It's in our DNA here at St. James. We continue to build on the foundation laid for us by those early St. James parishioners who laid a foundation of care, not only for the stones of our building, but also for the living stones that build a house of justice and love in a hurting world. And so, as we look back with gratitude and look forward with hope and determination, I'm delighted to say that today is the day on this Dedication Sunday where we are launching our annual pledge campaign. Now, let me take a moment. We sort of laid a rod against our own back, as Dominic says, by having Dedication Sunday and launching our pledge campaign for the annual campaign on the same day, because you'll know that we've been in a capital campaign to address the needs of this building, to replace the stones and to keep the roof sound and to replace our organ, which is in rather desperate need of a resurrection story over there. So the capital campaign is something in which we are all involved. If you're not yet involved, you will be soon in one way or another. It's something that a whole community does together. But today we're launching our annual pledge campaign, which is the campaign where we ask everyone who considers themselves a member of St. James to make a pledge and to let us know your intention for the coming year in 2023, and it is focused on the operational needs, the day-to-day needs of this cathedral. And those things are not in opposition to one another. They do go together. We can't do ministry without this wonderful building. This wonderful building without the ministry that we do is beautiful, but not much more. And so they do go together, but today we're launching our pledge campaign. And this is when it's your and my chance to think about prayerfully what it is that we each want to commit to the life of St. James in the coming year. But I don't want us to think about what are the needs of St. James operationally for next year. Here is this program, here is that program. Instead, as we look at our pledge this year, I would hope that we can riff a little bit more off of what our wonderful visiting priest, Lister Tong, was talking about over the last 3 weeks. When he said, part of what it means to be a Christian, part of what it means to be faithful and in relationship with God, is to simply take the time to sit and be and listen for God. And think back over what God has done in your life. He used the time frame of a week. Where has God been? What has God done in your life? Where is God calling you? Where is God drawing you? And he said, and after you've had a chance to identify that, next comes gratitude. And after gratitude comes a desire to respond back to God and to do something different this week. So taking a little bit from Lister's framework, I would like us to apply that to our pledge campaign this year. I'd like each of us to think about, where am I? If we're sitting here, we've survived the pandemic. We're in a community that's coming back to life. Take some time as you're considering your annual pledge, which is not only your time and talent, but your treasure. What is your hope for yourself about how you will be contributing financially to the life of this place and to the ministry of this place? Think about that, but think about where God is in your life, what God has been doing, and how you feel about that. If you have a sense of gratitude for God's overflowing love and grace and abundance and the ways that God has touched you, I hope you'll consider making an offering and a gift back to God. To St. James, yes, but ultimately to God. And we, each of us, are uniquely, wonderfully, and marvelously made, and we have such unique gifts to offer each one of us. So as you are thinking about your pledge for 23, let it include all of you that you intend to offer. And as you think about that financial gift that you'd like to render back to God, I don't think there's a formula. But I do think that if you're doing this prayerfully, when you finally write down what you intend to give back to God, it should fill you with a sense of peace, and it should fill you with joy. If you are giving back to God out of gratitude for what you have received, then giving back to God should bring joy. And if it's not, if it's bringing worry or resentment or boredom, you might need to think a little bit more and spend a little bit more time thinking about what you're doing with this pledge, thinking about how it is you're giving yourself back to God. And if you think my financial pledge is too little and doesn't matter in a big operation like this, you're simply wrong. It does matter. Everything matters in this place. Everything counts to God. And most importantly, it matters to you and your spiritual life, so that you know and you feel good about what you've said to God, about what you intend to give back of yourself. Again, God takes the ordinary and does extraordinary things. That's true with us, the living stones. We're just ordinary little stones, but through us, God builds a great creation. God builds a temple of love and justice. God is always taking ordinary things and transforming them into sacramental signs of God's power and God's grace and God's love in this world. We'll gather around this table in just a few minutes and see what God does with bread and wine and what God does with you and me as we share in that sacred meal. So as we go into this pledge season, I hope you approach it prayerfully. I hope you approach it joyfully. I hope it brings you peace. And I hope most of all that you can see the gift that you are. You can see yourself as one of the living stones, and you can join with all those you see around you and all those who have come before and all those who will be here in another 188 years and give thanks to God for the power and privilege of being in this community. Amen.